My name is Sophia, and I am 45 years old. For the past 15 years, I have been the sole caregiver for my mother, a woman who raised me in a faith that would eventually tear our family apart. I was born into the world of Jehovah's Witnesses, where love came with conditions and family bonds could be severed with the strike of a gavel from the elders. When I was 28, I made the decision that would change everything. I chose to leave the organization, and with that choice came a price I never fully understood until I lived it every single day for over a decade. The shunning began immediately. My two brothers, David and Michael, both still active in the congregation, were instructed to treat me as if I were dead. My father, an elder for over 30 years, could barely look at me without tears in his eyes, torn between his love for his daughter and his devotion to what he believed was God's organization. But my mother, she was different. Despite the pressure from the elders, despite the whispered conversations at the Kingdom Hall about her association with a disfellowshipped daughter, she never fully cut me off. She would call me in secret, meet me for coffee when no one from the congregation would see, and when my father wasn't around, she would hold me and tell me she loved me no matter what. The reason I left the organization wasn't dramatic or scandalous. I had simply begun questioning teachings that didn't align with my understanding of love and compassion. I had started reading outside literature, researching the organization's history, and asking questions that made the elders uncomfortable. When I couldn't in good conscience continue representing beliefs I no longer held, I chose to fade away quietly. But the organization doesn't allow for quiet departures. When I stopped attending meetings and declined to participate in field service, the elders pursued me relentlessly. They scheduled meeting after meeting, trying to bring me back into the fold. When I finally told them honestly that I could no longer believe the organization was God's sole channel of communication on earth, they had no choice but to disfellowship me for apostasy. The announcement was made on a Thursday night meeting. I wasn't there to hear it, but my mother called me afterward, crying. She told me that Brother Williams had stood at the podium and announced that Sophia Martinez was no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. That was it. 28 years of my life in that organization reduced to a single sentence that gave the congregation permission to treat me as if I had never existed. When Mom was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 62, everything changed again. Dad was already showing signs of his own decline, though we didn't know it then. He was forgetting appointments, losing his keys, becoming confused during his talks at the meetings. The elders suggested he step down from his position, which devastated him. Dad had defined himself by his service to the organization for over 3 decades. Without his elder responsibilities, he seemed lost and broken. Within 6 months, he had suffered a massive heart attack and died in his sleep. I wasn't allowed at his funeral. I stood across the street from the Kingdom Hall, watching through tears as my family mourned without me. That left Mom alone, confused, and scared. David lived 3 states away with his wife and 4 children. He had a demanding job as a software engineer and couldn't take time off to care for her. Michael lived closer, only 2 hours away, but he had just gotten married to a woman who made it clear that taking care of an aging mother-in-law wasn't part of her plans. They visited once a month if we were lucky, staying for a few hours, making small talk, and leaving with promises to come back soon that were rarely kept. The elders made their position clear to my brothers. I was disfellowshipped, and association with me would put their own standing in the congregation at risk. They were told that caring for Mom was their responsibility as faithful sons, but they were also warned that if they worked too closely with me in her care, questions would be raised about their loyalty to Jehovah's organization. It was an impossible situation that they solved by largely disappearing from Mom's life. So there I was, the black sheep, the apostate daughter, suddenly responsible for a woman whose mind was slowly slipping away. The irony wasn't lost on me. The family that had rejected me for my beliefs was now dependent on me for the most basic human need, care and compassion. But I didn't hesitate. This was my mother, the woman who had rocked me to sleep, who had bandaged my scraped knees, who had taught me to read using the Bible before I ever saw a secular book. Her illness didn't care about religious politics, and neither did my love for her. The first year was the hardest to accept. Mom was still mostly herself, just forgetful and confused sometimes. She would ask me why my brothers didn't visit more often, and I would make excuses for them. She would cry sometimes, saying she missed Dad and didn't understand why he had to die so young. During her lucid moments, she would apologize for the way the family had treated me, saying she never agreed with the shunning but felt powerless to stop it. Those conversations broke my heart because I could see the guilt she carried, the weight of choosing between her faith and her daughter every single day. I moved in with her that first year. My apartment lease was up, and it made sense financially and practically. I had been working as a freelance graphic designer, which gave me the flexibility to work from home and keep an eye on her. The house felt strange at first, filled with memories of family worship evenings, circuit assembly preparations, and the constant stream of brothers and sisters from the congregation who used to visit. Now it was just Mom and me, navigating this new reality together. The progression of her disease was relentless. By the second year, she was having trouble with basic tasks like cooking and managing her medications. I took over everything gradually, learning as I went. I researched Alzheimer's obsessively, joined online support groups, and tried to create routines that would give her days structure and meaning. I converted Dad's old study into a medical supply room, organized her medications in weekly pill containers, and put labels on everything in the house to help her navigate. The hardest part wasn't the physical care, though that became overwhelming as time went on. The hardest part was watching the woman who had raised me disappear piece by piece. Some days she would recognize me and we would have wonderful conversations about my childhood, her marriage to Dad, her dreams before she became a witness. Other days she would look at me with fear in her eyes and ask who I was and what I was doing in her house. There were days when she would call for Dad, forgetting he had died, and I would have to break her heart with the news all over again. My brother's visits became even more infrequent as Mom's condition worsened. David would call occasionally, always asking the same questions about her condition and her finances, but he rarely made the trip to see her. When he did visit, he seemed overwhelmed by the reality of her decline. He would stay for a few hours, looking uncomfortable and eager to leave. Michael stopped visiting altogether after his wife complained that Mom's condition was too upsetting for their young children to witness. They sent cards on birthdays and holidays, generic ones that could have been sent to anyone, signed with love from families that had essentially abandoned her. The isolation from the congregation was complete. People who had known Mom for decades, who had shared meals at our table and prayed in our living room, acted as if she no longer existed. Some would cross the street to avoid encountering her when I took her for walks in the neighborhood. Others would look through her as if she were invisible when we ran into them at the grocery store. The shunning that was meant for me had extended to include my sick mother, simply because she was under my care. By the fourth year, Mom needed help with everything. Bathing, dressing, eating, using the bathroom. Her sleep schedule was completely disrupted, and she would often be awake all night, confused and agitated. I learned to survive on 3 or 4 hours of sleep, catching naps when I could during the day. My freelance work suffered, and my income dropped dramatically. I applied for every government assistance program available, but the bureaucracy was overwhelming, and the help was minimal. I had to make the heartbreaking decision to put locks on the doors after Mom tried to leave the house at 3 in the morning, convinced she was late for a meeting. She had walked 6 blocks in her nightgown before a neighbor found her and called the police. The officer who brought her home was kind but firm about the safety issues. I installed cameras throughout the house so I could monitor her when I couldn't be in the same room. The woman who had once been the picture of dignity and independence was now a shadow of herself, and I was her only lifeline to safety and care. The financial strain was enormous. Mom's savings and Social Security covered some of the expenses, but medical bills, medications, special foods, adult diapers, and all the supplies needed for her care added up quickly. I had to sell her car first, then start selling off pieces of furniture and jewelry. Dad's tools sat in the garage gathering dust while I tried to figure out if they were worth anything. I applied for every grant and assistance program I could find, spent hours on hold with insurance companies fighting for coverage of necessary supplies and services. David called one day during the 5th year, asking about Mom's finances. He had heard from someone at his congregation that property values in Mom's neighborhood were increasing, and he wanted to know if I had considered selling the house. I explained that Mom was still living there, still needed the familiar environment, and that moving her at this stage would be traumatic and potentially dangerous. He suggested looking into nursing homes, saying it might be better for everyone. When I told him how much good nursing homes cost and that Mom's insurance wouldn't cover most of it, he went quiet. When I suggested he contribute financially to her care, he said he would pray about it and talk to his wife. I never heard back about that conversation. The daily routine became my entire world. Wake up at 6 to check on Mom, help her use the bathroom, get her dressed, give her medications, prepare breakfast that she might or might not eat. Spend the morning trying to engage her in activities that might stimulate her mind or at least keep her occupied. Lunch, medications, a nap if I was lucky, more activities in the afternoon. Dinner was often a struggle as she frequently forgot how to chew or swallow properly. Evenings were for bathing, more medications, and trying to get her settled for sleep that might last 2 hours or might not come at all. I became an expert on Alzheimer's symptoms, stages, medications, and care techniques. I learned to recognize the signs of a urinary tract infection, which could cause sudden changes in behavior and confusion. I understood the importance of maintaining routines, even when Mom couldn't remember what day it was. I knew which music from her youth could sometimes bring moments of clarity, which foods she could still manage to eat safely, and which activities might keep her engaged for a few precious minutes. The loneliness was crushing. My friends from before I was disfellowshipped had all been fellow witnesses, and they were forbidden from associating with me. The friends I had made after leaving the organization gradually drifted away as my availability for social activities disappeared entirely. Dating became impossible. How do you explain to someone that you're 35 years old and can't go out for dinner because your mother might try to cook something and burn down the house? How do you have a relationship when you haven't had a full night's sleep in 3 years? There were times when I felt so angry and resentful that it scared me. Not at Mom, never at her, but at the situation, at my brothers, at the religion that had created this mess. I would stand in her room while she slept, watching her breathing, and I would rage silently at the unfairness of it all. Why was I the one carrying this burden alone? Why were the faithful sons nowhere to be found when their mother needed them most? Why was the disfellowshipped daughter the only one who stepped up? But then Mom would wake up and smile at me, sometimes recognizing me, sometimes not, but always with such trust and gratitude in her eyes. She couldn't always remember my name, but she knew I was safe. She would reach for my hand and squeeze it, and all the anger would melt away. This was love in its purest form, caring for someone who could no longer care for themselves, expecting nothing in return except the knowledge that you're doing what's right. By the 7th year, Mom was completely dependent on me. She could no longer walk safely on her own, had trouble swallowing, and rarely spoke in complete sentences. I learned to interpret her needs from gestures, sounds, and facial expressions. I became expert at recognizing the signs of distress, knew exactly how to position her to prevent bed sores, and could tell from the way she held her mouth whether she was having trouble with her dentures. The physical demands were taking their toll on my own health. I had developed chronic back pain from lifting and moving her, my hands were constantly cracked and dry from washing and sanitizing everything, and I had gained 30 pounds from eating convenience foods and stress eating in the middle of the night. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized myself. I was 38 years old and felt like I was 70. I hired a home health aide for a few hours twice a week, which was all I could afford. Rosa was a godsend, a kind woman from El Salvador who had been caring for elderly people for 20 years. She taught me techniques for making Mom more comfortable, showed me exercises that might help with her mobility, and most importantly, she gave me a few hours to shower, run errands, or just sit quietly without being constantly vigilant. Rosa didn't speak much English, but she communicated with Mom in a way that transcended language. She would sing Spanish lullabies while helping Mom with her bath, and somehow Mom would relax in a way she never did with me. Rosa taught me that caring for someone with dementia isn't just about meeting their physical needs, it's about preserving their dignity and finding ways to connect with whatever part of them is still present. But even with Rosa's help, the responsibility was overwhelming. I was making medical decisions for someone who could no longer communicate her wishes clearly. I was managing her medications, coordinating with doctors, dealing with insurance companies, and trying to maintain some quality of life for both of us. There were days when I felt like I was drowning, like I couldn't possibly continue for another day, let alone years. The breaking point came during the 8th year when Mom had a series of small strokes that left her even more impaired. She was hospitalized for 2 weeks, and I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in a chair beside her bed, advocating for her care, trying to understand the barrage of medical information that was thrown at us daily. The doctors were kind but overworked, the nurses were efficient but busy, and I was the only constant presence ensuring that Mom's needs were met and her dignity preserved. David flew in for 2 days during her hospitalization, the first time I had seen him in over 3 years. He looked uncomfortable the entire time, clearly out of his element in dealing with the reality of Mom's condition. He stood at the foot of her bed making awkward small talk while I held her hand and translated her needs for the medical staff. When she became agitated and started crying, he stepped out into the hallway, unable to handle seeing his mother in such a vulnerable state. During his visit, he pulled me aside and said the elders at his congregation had been asking about Mom's spiritual condition. They wanted to know if she was still attending meetings, still participating in field service, still living according to the organization's standards. I stared at him in disbelief. Our mother was dying by inches, her mind was almost completely gone, and he was worried about whether she was turning in her field service reports. I told him exactly what I thought of his priorities, and he left the next day without saying goodbye to either of us. When Mom came home from the hospital, she needed even more intensive care. I had to learn to operate medical equipment, manage feeding tubes when she could no longer eat safely, and provide round-the-clock monitoring. The house began to look and feel like a medical facility, with hospital beds, oxygen tanks, and supplies taking over what had once been a comfortable family home. The social worker assigned to Mom's case was a practical woman named Janet who had worked with families dealing with dementia for over 15 years. She helped me navigate the complex world of Medicare benefits, Medicaid applications, and disability services. More importantly, she validated what I was experiencing, acknowledging that family caregivers often suffer from depression, anxiety, and health problems of their own due to the enormous stress they carry. Janet connected me with a support group for adult children caring for parents with dementia. The group met once a month at a community center, and for the first few months, I couldn't attend because I couldn't leave Mom alone for that long. When I finally found a way to arrange care for those 2 hours, the group became a lifeline. Hearing other people share similar stories made me feel less alone and less crazy. There was Maria, whose father had wandered away from home 3 times before she finally had to put him in a memory care facility. There was Robert, whose mother had become aggressive and paranoid, accusing him of stealing from her and threatening to call the police. There was Jennifer, whose husband had early-onset Alzheimer's and was only 53 when he was diagnosed. Each story was different, but the themes were the same: exhaustion, grief, guilt, and the overwhelming sense of responsibility for another human being's well-being. The group leader, Dr. Peterson, taught us about anticipatory grief, the process of mourning someone who is still alive but no longer the person they used to be. She explained that what we were experiencing was normal, that it was okay to grieve the loss of our relationships with our loved ones even while they were still physically present. This concept gave me permission to acknowledge what I had been feeling but couldn't name. I was mourning my mother while still caring for her body. By the 10th year, Mom's world had shrunk to the confines of our house, then to her bedroom, and finally to her bed. She could no longer sit up unassisted, couldn't feed herself, and communicated mostly through facial expressions and sounds. But she was still there in small ways. Sometimes she would track my movement with her eyes, and I could see recognition flicker across her face. Sometimes she would squeeze my hand when I held hers, and I chose to believe that was her way of saying she knew I was there. I started writing in a journal during this time, partly to document Mom's condition for medical purposes, but mostly to preserve my own sanity. Writing became my outlet for all the emotions I couldn't express anywhere else. I wrote about the good days when Mom seemed more present, about the heartbreaking moments when she would cry for reasons I couldn't understand, about my anger at my brothers and the religion that had created this situation, about my fears for the future. The journal entries from those years are painful to read now. Page after page of exhaustion, loneliness, and desperation. But they're also filled with small moments of grace: the afternoon when Mom smiled at something funny I said, the morning when she seemed to recognize a song from her childhood, the evening when she fell asleep peacefully in my arms. These moments reminded me that even in the midst of devastating loss, love persists. Michael called sporadically, usually around holidays, always asking the same surface-level questions about Mom's health but never offering any real help or support. His calls felt like obligation rather than genuine concern, and I started letting them go to voicemail. His messages were always brief and awkward, asking me to call him back with updates, but when I did call back, he rarely answered, and when he did, he seemed eager to end the conversation quickly. During one of these calls, I made the mistake of being honest about how difficult things had become. I told him about Mom's latest medical crisis, about my own health problems, about the financial strain I was under. Instead of offering help, he suggested that maybe it was time to consider other options, meaning a nursing home. When I explained that good memory care facilities cost more than Mom's entire monthly income, he said maybe we should look into state-funded facilities. I had visited those facilities. They were warehouses for people waiting to die, understaffed and depressing. I told him I would never put Mom in one of those places, and he said I was being unrealistic about what was possible. The 11th and 12th years were a blur of declining health, increasing medical needs, and my own growing exhaustion. I developed anxiety and depression, which I couldn't address properly because I couldn't take time away from Mom's care to focus on my own mental health. I was surviving on a combination of determination, caffeine, and the knowledge that no one else was going to step in to help. Dr. Martinez, Mom's primary care physician, became concerned about my well-being during this period. She could see that I was losing weight, that my hands shook from exhaustion, that I was having trouble concentrating during medical appointments. She referred me to a counselor who specialized in caregiver stress, but I could only manage phone sessions because leaving Mom alone wasn't safe. The counselor, Dr. Sarah Chen, helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of complicated grief. I was grieving the loss of my mother while simultaneously trying to care for her physical needs. I was grieving the loss of my own life, my career, my relationships, and my future. But I was also carrying guilt about these feelings, believing that I should be grateful for the opportunity to care for Mom, and that feeling resentful made me a bad daughter. Dr. Chen helped me understand that these feelings were normal and didn't diminish the love I had for Mom or the value of the care I was providing. She taught me techniques for managing anxiety and depression, strategies for getting better sleep despite the constant interruptions, and ways to find small moments of joy even in the midst of such difficult circumstances. Mom stopped recognizing me consistently during the 13th year. There would be brief moments of clarity when she would look at me and smile with recognition, but most days I was just another stranger in her shrinking world. Those moments of recognition became precious beyond measure, and I would hold on to them for weeks, replaying them in my mind when things got particularly difficult. During this period, I had to make the decision to hire more help. Rosa's daughter Carmen joined her in providing care, and together they covered 12 hours a day, allowing me to sleep for longer stretches and take care of necessary tasks outside the house. The additional expense strained our finances even further, but it was the only way to provide adequate care while preserving what was left of my sanity. The legal and financial complexities began to emerge more clearly as Mom's condition deteriorated. I had been managing her affairs informally, but as her assets dwindled and decisions became more complex, I realized I needed proper legal authority. Getting power of attorney for someone with advanced dementia is complicated, and I had to navigate a legal system that seemed designed to make things as difficult as possible for families already dealing with impossible situations. That's when the real shock came. While organizing Mom's papers for the power of attorney process, I discovered that she had never updated her will after Dad died. But more importantly, I found a will that Dad had written just 6 months before his death, a will that no one else in the family knew existed. In that will, he had left everything to Mom, and in Mom's original will, written years before my disfellowshipping, she had named me as her primary beneficiary. The documents were clear and legally binding. Dad's will had been properly witnessed and notarized, written during a period when he was still serving as an elder and was clearly mentally competent. Mom's will predated her Alzheimer's diagnosis by several years and had also been properly executed. According to these legal documents, I was the sole heir to everything: the house, the savings accounts, the life insurance policies, and all personal property. My brothers had assumed that Mom's estate would be divided equally among the 3 of us, despite their absence from her care. They had even made comments over the years about what they would do with their inheritance, how they would use their portion of the house sale to pay off debts or fund their children's educations. But the legal reality was different. I was the sole heir to everything. The house where I had been caring for Mom, the savings account I had been carefully managing to pay for her care, the small investments Dad had made over the years, the life insurance policy that had been paying for some of her medical expenses, all of it was legally mine. The irony was overwhelming. The daughter who had been cast out of the family for her beliefs was the one who would inherit everything, while the faithful sons who had abandoned their mother would receive nothing. I didn't tell my brothers about the will immediately. Part of me was afraid they would suddenly become involved in Mom's care if they knew what was at stake financially. Part of me was angry enough to want them to continue assuming they would inherit something while they continued to do nothing to help. But mostly, I was focused on Mom and didn't want to deal with the family drama that would inevitably follow. During the 14th year, Mom's health began to decline more rapidly. She had several more minor strokes, developed pneumonia twice, and was losing weight despite my efforts to maintain her nutrition. The doctors began using words like end stage and comfort care, and I knew we were approaching the final chapter of this long, difficult journey. I made the decision to tell my brothers about their financial situation, not because I felt they deserved to know, but because I wanted to give them one last chance to be present for their mother. I called David first, explaining Mom's condition and mentioning that there were legal and financial matters we needed to discuss. He said he would try to visit soon, but soon never came. When I called him back 2 weeks later and told him explicitly that Mom was dying and this might be his last chance to see her, he said he would check his schedule and get back to me. He never did. Michael's reaction was different. When I told him that Mom's will named me as the sole beneficiary, he was silent for a long time. Then he began arguing that the will was outdated, that Mom would have wanted to change it if she had been capable of understanding the situation, that it wasn't fair for me to inherit everything when I had been disfellowshipped. He suggested that I should voluntarily split the inheritance equally among the 3 of us, regardless of what the legal documents said. I listened to his arguments and felt a familiar anger rising in my chest. For 15 years, I had sacrificed my health, my career, my social life, my relationships, and my financial security to care for our mother. I had been the only one present during her frightening moments of confusion, the only one holding her hand during medical procedures, the only one making sure she was clean and comfortable and safe every single day. My brothers had visited occasionally, called sporadically, and contributed nothing to her actual care. And now Michael was suggesting that I should share the inheritance equally because it was the fair thing to do. I told him exactly what I thought about his definition of fairness. I reminded him of every missed visit, every unanswered call, every time I had asked for help and been ignored. I pointed out that while I was learning to change adult diapers and manage feeding tubes, he was living his comfortable life with his wife and children, unencumbered by the daily reality of caring for a parent with dementia. The inheritance wasn't a lottery prize to be divided equally among siblings. It was recognition from our parents about who had actually been there when they needed someone most. Michael became angry, accusing me of manipulating Mom and isolating her from her sons. He said that my disfellowshipping had created the family division and that I was now trying to profit from it. He threatened to contest the will, claiming that Mom hadn't been mentally competent when she made her legal decisions, despite the fact that her will had been written years before her diagnosis. That conversation ended our relationship completely. I realized that in Michael's mind, I had never been a daughter caring for her mother out of love and obligation. I had been an opportunist, positioning myself to inherit money that rightfully belonged to the faithful children. The fact that I had received no support, no relief, no assistance from either of my brothers for 15 years was irrelevant to him. What mattered was that the disfellowshipped daughter was going to inherit property that he felt should be his. David's reaction was more subdued but equally disappointing. He acknowledged that I had done the majority of Mom's care but suggested that perhaps we could work out some arrangement where I received a larger portion of the inheritance in recognition of my service, while they received smaller portions in recognition of their status as sons. He framed it as a compromise, a way to maintain family relationships despite our religious differences. I realized that neither of my brothers understood what had actually happened over the past 15 years. In their minds, I had been living rent-free in Mom's house, probably saving money by not having my own place, maybe even taking some of her funds for my own use. They didn't understand that I had given up my career advancement, my social life, my mental and physical health. They didn't understand that caring for someone with advanced dementia is a full-time job that never ends, that requires skills most people never develop, that changes you fundamentally as a person. More importantly, they didn't understand that this had never been about money for me. If someone had offered me $1 million to walk away and let someone else care for Mom, I wouldn't have taken it. This was about love, about obligation, about doing what was right when no one else would step up. The inheritance was just a legal recognition of reality. I had already paid for it with 15 years of my life. Mom passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in spring during my 15th year of caring for her. I was holding her hand, reading to her from a book of poetry she had loved when I was young. Her breathing had been labored for several days, and the hospice nurse had warned me that the end was near. When her breathing finally stopped, I sat with her for a long time, still holding her hand, thinking about everything we had been through together. I called my brothers to tell them about Mom's death. David said he would try to make it to the funeral, depending on his work schedule. Michael said he would be there but wanted to discuss the will and the estate arrangements before any services were held. Neither of them asked how I was doing, how the final days had been, or whether I needed any support during this difficult time. The funeral arrangements were complicated by the family's religious status. The elders at Mom's congregation insisted that the service be held at the Kingdom Hall, despite the fact that Mom hadn't attended meetings in over 5 years due to her condition. They wanted to conduct the service according to their standards, which meant focusing on resurrection hope and organizational teachings rather than Mom's actual life and the person she had been. I wasn't allowed to participate in the planning or the service itself, but I was permitted to attend as long as I sat separately from the family. I watched from the back as my brothers sat in the front row, accepting condolences from congregation members who praised them for being such devoted sons. The eulogy focused on Mom's faithful service to Jehovah, her years of pioneering, her dedication to the organization. There was no mention of her struggle with dementia, no acknowledgement of who had actually cared for her during her final years, no recognition of the love and sacrifice that had defined the last 15 years of her life. After the service, Michael approached me about the will. He had consulted with an attorney and was prepared to contest it on the grounds that Mom had not been mentally competent to make estate planning decisions after her Alzheimer's diagnosis. I pointed out that her will predated her diagnosis by many years and that Dad's will, which he also wanted to contest, had been written while Dad was still serving as an elder and was clearly mentally competent. The legal battle lasted 6 months and was emotionally devastating. My brothers hired an attorney and tried to prove that I had exercised undue influence over Mom, that I had isolated her from her family, and that I had manipulated her into naming me as her sole beneficiary. They brought witnesses from the congregation who testified about my disfellowshipping and suggested that my apostasy had damaged my relationship with my parents. I had to hire my own attorney, using money from Mom's estate to defend my legal right to inherit from the woman I had cared for devotedly for 15 years. The legal process was brutal, forcing me to relive years of painful memories while my brothers and their attorney painted me as a manipulative opportunist who had taken advantage of vulnerable elderly parents. But the legal facts were clear. The wills were valid, had been properly executed, and reflected the true wishes of my parents. More importantly, I had documentation of everything. My journals, medical records, financial records, and the testimony of Rosa, Carmen, and other healthcare providers painted a clear picture of who had actually been present and responsible for Mom's care. The judge ruled in my favor, upholding both wills and awarding me the entire estate. The inheritance wasn't life-changing money. After legal fees, medical debts, funeral expenses, and other costs, I was left with a modest house, a small savings account, and enough money to give me some financial security for the first time in years. But it represented something much more important than money. It was validation that my sacrifice had been recognized and valued. By the people who mattered most, my parents. My brothers haven't spoken to me since the judge's ruling. David moved away shortly after the legal proceedings ended, and I heard through mutual acquaintances that he told people in his new congregation that his apostate sister had stolen his inheritance through legal manipulation. Michael continues to live nearby but treats me as if I don't exist, which is essentially how he treated me throughout Mom's illness anyway. I'm still learning how to live a normal life again. After 15 years of constant vigilance and care, I find myself waking up in the middle of the night listening for sounds that no longer come from the next room. I'm slowly rebuilding my career, reconnecting with friends, and trying to figure out who I am when I'm not defined primarily as someone's caregiver. The house feels strange without Mom's medical equipment and supplies. I've converted her room back into a regular bedroom, but I still find myself checking on it habitually. I kept some of her things, the items that reminded me of who she was before the disease took her away. Her favorite books, some jewelry, photographs of better times when our family was whole and happy. I think about my brothers sometimes and feel sad rather than angry. They missed the opportunity to really know their mother during her final years, to show her love and care when she was most vulnerable, to demonstrate the kind of compassion that their religion supposedly taught them. Their religious devotion, which was supposed to make them better people, instead made them worse sons. But mostly I think about Mom and the 15 years we had together. They were difficult years, heartbreaking years, exhausting years that tested me in ways I never imagined possible. But they were also years filled with quiet moments of connection, small acts of love, and the satisfaction of knowing I had done everything possible to make her comfortable and safe. I don't regret the choice I made to care for her, even though it cost me so much. I don't regret leaving the organization that would have forced me to abandon my principles and my authentic self. And I don't regret accepting the inheritance that my parents chose to leave me, despite my brother's claims that I didn't deserve it. Sometimes people ask me if I'm bitter about what happened, if I resent the years I spent caring for Mom while my brothers lived their lives freely. The honest answer is complicated. I'm angry about the way I was treated by my family and their religion. I'm frustrated by the lack of support I received during an incredibly difficult time. I'm disappointed that my brothers couldn't find a way to put love for their mother above their religious obligations. But I'm not bitter about the time I spent with Mom. Those 15 years taught me things about love, sacrifice, resilience, and strength that I never could have learned any other way. I discovered that I was capable of much more than I had ever believed possible. I learned that real love isn't conditional on someone's ability to love you back or even recognize who you are. I learned that doing what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Now, at 45, I'm starting a new chapter of my life. I have the financial security to take some risks, to maybe go back to school, to travel, to pursue relationships that were impossible when I was caring for mom full-time. I have the emotional maturity that comes from surviving something incredibly difficult and emerging stronger on the other side. The inheritance my parents left me wasn't just money and property. It was recognition, validation, and the knowledge that the people who knew me best trusted me with their final wishes. It was proof that love transcends religious differences, that character matters more than conformity, and that sometimes the child who disappoints you in one way can exceed all expectations in another. Looking back on these 15 years, I understand now that they changed me in ways I'm still discovering. I'm not the same person who moved in with mom all those years ago. That Sophia was younger, more naive about what love really costs, more hopeful that family bonds could overcome religious differences. The woman I am now has been tested by fire and emerged stronger, but also scarred. The physical changes are obvious. My hands bear the marks of years of constant washing and sanitizing. My back aches from countless nights sleeping in uncomfortable chairs beside mom's bed. I have scars on my arms from when mom, in her confusion, would scratch or bite during particularly difficult episodes. My hair started going gray in my 30s, years earlier than it should have, a visible testament to the stress I carried. But the emotional changes run deeper. I've learned to live with a level of hypervigilance that doesn't simply disappear when the crisis is over. Even now, months after mom's death, I wake up several times each night, listening for sounds that will never come again. I catch myself checking on empty rooms, my body still programmed to be constantly alert for signs of distress or danger. The grief I carry is complex and layered. I grieve for the mother I lost gradually over 15 years, watching her disappear piece by piece until only her body remained. I grieve for the relationship we might have had if Alzheimer's hadn't stolen her mind. I grieve for the family that was destroyed by rigid religious doctrine, for the brothers who chose organizational loyalty over human compassion. But I also grieve for myself, for the years of my life that were consumed by caregiving, for the relationships I never formed, for the career advancement I never pursued, for the experiences I never had. People sometimes tell me I'm a hero, that what I did was extraordinary, that I should be proud of my sacrifice. But I don't feel heroic. I feel tired. I feel like I did what anyone would do for someone they love, even though the evidence suggests that's not true. Most people wouldn't have stayed. Most people would have found reasons to walk away, to let someone else handle the difficult parts, to prioritize their own lives over the needs of a person whose mind was disappearing. The isolation of those years created wounds that are still healing. I had forgotten how to make casual conversation with people my own age. I had lost the ability to think about my own wants and needs, having spent so long focused entirely on mom's immediate requirements. I had developed social anxiety from years of having almost no social interaction beyond brief exchanges with healthcare providers and the monthly support group meetings. Dating feels impossible, not just because I'm out of practice, but because I can't imagine explaining my story to someone new. How do you tell someone that you spent your 30s and early 40s caring for a parent with dementia? How do you explain that you've never had a normal adult relationship because your life was consumed by someone else's needs? How do you convince someone that you're ready for partnership when you're still learning how to live independently again? The financial inheritance, while legally mine, feels heavy with moral complexity. My brothers see it as evidence of my manipulation, but they don't understand that I would trade every penny of it to have had their help during mom's illness. The money can't give me back the 15 years I spent in caregiving mode. It can't restore my physical health or erase the trauma of watching someone I love disappear slowly. It can't rebuild the family relationships that were destroyed by religious rigidity. But it does give me options I've never had before. For the first time in my adult life, I have financial security. I don't have to worry about making rent or affording groceries. I can consider going back to school, maybe pursuing the art degree I abandoned when I left the organization and needed to support myself quickly. I can travel, something I've dreamed about but never had the money or freedom to do. I can take risks, both personal and professional, that were impossible when every decision had to be filtered through Mom's immediate needs. The house holds both comfort and pain. Every room contains memories of Mom's decline, but also moments of connection and love. The kitchen where I learned to puree foods when she could no longer chew solid meals. The living room where we would sit together listening to music from her youth, hoping it might spark recognition or joy. The bathroom where I helped her maintain her dignity even when she could no longer manage personal care independently. The bedroom where she spent her final years, where she died peacefully while I held her hand. I've considered selling the house and starting fresh somewhere new, but I'm not ready yet. This is the place where I learned what I was capable of, where I discovered reserves of strength and patience I didn't know I possessed. It's where I lived through the most difficult period of my life and emerged intact. Leaving feels like abandoning that part of my story, and I'm not ready to do that yet. The legal victory over my brothers feels hollow now. I was fighting for more than money, I was fighting for recognition of what I had sacrificed, for validation that my years of service mattered, for acknowledgement that love and devotion should count for something. The judge's ruling gave me legal vindication, but it couldn't repair the family relationships that were destroyed in the process. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if the roles had been reversed, if I had been the one living far away with a demanding career and young children, if one of my brothers had been the one available to provide care. Would I have stepped up to help, even if it meant defying religious prohibitions? Would I have found ways to support Mom's care even if I couldn't be physically present? I want to believe I would have, but the truth is I'll never know for certain. The support group continues to meet monthly, and I still attend occasionally, though my role has changed from active caregiver to bereaved survivor. The dynamics are different now. Some people look to me as someone who completed the journey, who saw their loved one through to the end without having to resort to institutional care. Others seem uncomfortable with my presence, perhaps worried that my story represents their future, the potential for years more of decline and increasing needs. New members join the group regularly, usually looking shell-shocked and overwhelmed, much like I did when I first started attending. I try to be helpful without being preachy, sharing practical advice about managing medications and preventing falls and navigating insurance bureaucracy. But mostly I listen, remembering how desperately I needed people who understood what I was going through during those dark middle years. Dr. Chen, my counselor, has helped me understand that healing from this experience will be a long process. The hypervigilance, the social anxiety, the complex grief, all of these are normal responses to years of chronic stress and loss. She's taught me techniques for managing the anxiety, for rebuilding my sense of self as something more than a caregiver, for imagining a future that includes joy and fulfillment rather than just survival. One of the hardest things to accept is that I'm angry with Mom sometimes, even though I know her illness wasn't her fault. I'm angry that she got sick so young, that I had to watch her deteriorate for so many years, that she never got to know the woman I became through caring for her. I'm angry that the last coherent conversation we had was about her guilt over the family's treatment of me, rather than about all the good memories we shared. I'm angry that Alzheimer's stole so much from both of us. But I'm also grateful in ways that surprise me. I'm grateful that I was able to keep her at home, that she died in familiar surroundings rather than in an institutional setting. I'm grateful for the moments of connection we shared even in her advanced stages, the times when she would squeeze my hand or smile at something I said. I'm grateful that I learned what I was capable of, that I discovered strength I didn't know I possessed. I'm grateful that I can look back on those 15 years and know that I did everything possible to make her comfortable and safe. The inheritance my parents left me represents more than financial security. It's proof that they saw and valued what I did, that they understood the sacrifices I made, that they wanted to ensure I would be taken care of after years of taking care of others. When my father wrote that final will 6 months before his death, he was acknowledging that I was the daughter who would be there when it mattered most. When my mother never changed her original will, despite years of pressure to shun me, she was affirming that love transcends religious differences. My brothers may never understand or accept this reality. They may continue to believe that I manipulated vulnerable elderly parents for financial gain. They may tell themselves that their absence from mom's care was justified by religious requirements, that they were being faithful while I was being opportunistic. They may never acknowledge that their faithfulness came at the cost of their mother's well-being and their own opportunity to demonstrate real love in action. But their understanding or acceptance isn't necessary for me to move forward. I know what I did and why I did it. I know that when mom needed someone most, I was there. I know that when the cost became almost unbearable, I found ways to pay it. I know that I loved her not because of what she could do for me or because of how she made me feel, but simply because she was my mother and she needed care. The woman I am today at 45 is fundamentally different from the woman I was at 30 when this journey began. I'm stronger but also more vulnerable. I'm more confident in my ability to handle crisis but also more aware of the toll that constant vigilance takes on the human spirit. I'm more independent but also more hungry for genuine connection with people who understand complexity and loss and the weight of difficult choices. I'm learning to live without the constant sense of urgency that defined my caregiving years. I'm learning to make decisions based on what I want rather than what someone else needs. I'm learning to sleep through the night without waking up to check on someone else's breathing. I'm learning to have conversations about topics other than medications and doctor appointments and insurance claims. Most importantly, I'm learning to forgive myself for all the things I couldn't fix. I couldn't cure mom's Alzheimer's. I couldn't restore my family relationships. I couldn't make the burden lighter or the grief less painful. I couldn't save her from dying, and I couldn't save myself from the trauma of watching it happen slowly over 15 years. But I could be present. I could be consistent. I could be loving even when love was difficult and thankless and exhausting. I could ensure that she was never alone with her fear and confusion. I could preserve her dignity even when she could no longer preserve it herself. I could advocate for her needs when she could no longer articulate them. These things mattered, even if they didn't change the ultimate outcome. The inheritance I received isn't just money and property. It's validation that what I did mattered, that the sacrifices I made were seen and valued, that love in action is worth more than religious compliance or social expectations. It's recognition that sometimes the child who disappoints you in one way can exceed all expectations in the ways that matter most. It's proof that real faith is demonstrated through service to others, especially when that service is difficult and unrecognized and costly. I am the sole heir not because I manipulated anyone or because I was lucky with legal documents. I am the sole heir because when my parents needed someone most, I was there. When everyone else found excuses to be elsewhere, I stayed. When the cost became too high for others to pay, I found a way to afford it. That's worth more than any monetary inheritance could ever be, and it's a legacy I can carry forward with pride rather than shame, with gratitude rather than resentment, with hope for what the future might hold rather than regret for what the past has taken away.